Hello again, Rob Churnside. Yes, it's February 6th. And even though February is the shortest month, it's got a lot of excitement in it. And who's going to bring the excitement tonight? Talking about Black History Month and some of the history of Cecil County. Historian for the Cecil County Historical Society and professor at Wilmington College, Mike Dixon. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Oh, you're my favorite guest.
Oh, thanks.
Because I learned stuff.
Well, that's good. That's great. Thank you.
So, yes, it is Black History Month, February. And I think you were telling me earlier that Cecil County has pretty much a long-standing history in the civil rights movement.
Right. I mean, it's really got a lot of African-American history in it. You just travel across the countryside, you see the old schoolhouses. We once had 12 African-American schoolhouses, lots of little churches scattered here and there, and every one of those has a strong story. But what we were talking about before we started was Cecil County and the civil rights movement. Rob, there was probably one of the earliest cases in civil rights came out of Port Deposit in 1968. There was this lady from Massachusetts who had been here to operate a Freedmen's Bureau schools to train train African Americans in the basics of reading and writing. And it's 1868, and she took a train to Baltimore. And when she got to Baltimore, they told her she had to go to the segregated car. Well, the Lincoln administration and the Congress had passed civil rights laws. And she said, I know my rights. And she started to stand up for them. And it actually shows up with her standing, and she lost that case. But you have to, at least, here was a young woman, young teacher from Massachusetts below the Mason-Dixon line trying to stand up. You come all the way down through time, let me take you to 1904. One of the things that kind of shapes our history is being right here on the line. There's Delaware over there and Pennsylvania up here.
Right.
Guy named William Henry Harrison Hart. He was the assistant counsel for the Library of Congress, African American, and Maryland had just passed what they called the Segregated Car Act. It was kind of like a Rosa Parks story where you had to go to the back of the train, and the conductor came after he came across from Newark, says, you got to go to the back of the car. He knew his rights, and he said, no, I'm not going to go to the back of the car. Well, he was a lawyer. He was schooled in law. So his case will make it into the courts of Maryland. So you got a lot of stories of people standing up for their rights.
And this William Harrison Hart guy, he didn't actually totally win his case, did he?
He had for 1904, going up against the judicial system, the legislature, he had a great deal of success. He had a partial victory, but a strong victory. You see, he took it all the way up through the various levels of court, and they decided that any trains that were traveling interstate, going, say, from Philadelphia to Baltimore or D.C., state to state, they could not have segregated cars in the Pennsylvania Railroad. Right, federal laws.
So if you fast forward a little bit further to the actual civil rights movement that many of us are familiar with, back in the 50s and 60s, what happened in Cecil County then?
Well, Rob, and in fact, there was an enormous amount of activity around that. It's the same story. As folks would travel across that state line, Mason-Dixon line, Route 40 was open. I-95 was not open when we start talking about this. And they would run into the segregated laws of our restaurants, hotels, and motels. So they began refusing access to people of color. Well, the Freedom Riders, about 1961 or 62, will make our little Route 40 all through here a strong focus. Now, it's a complicated story, and it goes through a lot of, there was a lot of pushback. There were folks that got locked up in the Elkton jail for refusing to leave the restaurant counters and stuff. But eventually, that too worked, because in the mid-60s, Maryland passes the public accommodation law. And the Route 40 story is really a powerful story.
What you were telling me briefly last time you were here about the African, explain how that worked.
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of elements, Rob, to this story. We were just talking about Route 40. President Kennedy was deeply involved in it. The Soviet Union was involved in it. Cuba was involved in it. And what caused it to get national attention, because it really got national attention, was 95 wasn't open. Ambassadors from newly decolonized countries in Africa were coming down Route 40
to go to Washington.
Right. And they'd stop at our hot dog stands, or Howard Johnson's, or truck stops, gas stations. and they would refuse to serve them. Well, the Russians got a hold of this, and they said, you know, Mr. Ambassador, they talk a good game in America. They tell you how you're equal over there, don't they? Well, guess what? In the Soviet Union, you really are equal. They get, in a diplomatic sort of way, in the middle of the Cold War, they actually start getting traction with that. Kennedy says, we can't have this. So it gets his attention on this, too. And there was a whole, I do a talk on it, I called it Collision on Route 40. And it's the Cold War, the Soviet Union, threats of nuclear war. Kennedy says, we got to get this thing cleaned up. And eventually they did.
So that's good. And here we are today. It's Black History Month. And the man with the history and the plan, Mike Dixon. Anything you think we should get into when you come back again?
Oh, why don't we talk about the harbors and rivers of the county next time, or something like that.
And that sounds good. And folks out there in TV land, it is Black History Month, and if you just cross the Susquehanna River and go to the Havre de Grace Maritime Museum, they have a whole display and wing on the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that happened in Cecil County too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We were on the Underground Railroad. I mean, this location, Rob, where we're right in this northeastern corner of Maryland. Frederick Douglass makes his great escape through here. Lots of people we don't even know their names, but yeah, this county has powerful stories, African American history stories.
February, Black History Month, right here on Cecil TV with Man History, Mike Dixon.
Thanks, Rob.